It's time for the Larry H. Miller Utah Summer Games at Southern Utah University in Cedar City. Register today to participate in the 40th anniversary season of a Utah sports tradition at utahsummergames.org. Participate in over 50 sports around the state. Then plan to join the opening ceremonies Friday, June 5th, presented by State Bank of Southern Utah. Register today to participate in the 40th anniversary season of the Larry H. Miller Utah Summer Games. Make game day yours. Tickets, food and drinks, stats, and streaming. Everything you need is in the Utah Mammoth app. Download today and make game night easy. Download on both Android and iPhone. Tusk Top.
It's time for the biggest story of the day. This is What Made the Cut with JJ and Alex on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
All right, it's a Friday. Let's talk some football. Let's make this a football Friday in April. Steve Bartle joins us live on the show right now. Steve, what's up? How's it going?
I mean, we can keep talking about Rory at the Masters. That's fine with me.
Yeah, I'm waiting to hear your flaming hot take on the Masters right now. It's a pretty impressive round, huh?
Yeah, not too bad. That shot on 17 to chip it in from was just, I don't even know how far it was, but just impressive stuff. And really, you know, for Rory, obviously we know last year was such a breakthrough, and it's really cool to see him in his realm right now, just playing golf at a different level. It's been a lot of fun to watch these first 2 days, and hopefully he's able to get the job done again this year. Yeah,
and if he finishes off, he joins elite company. It'd be his sixth major victory, and all the talk about, you know, what he hasn't done in his career, that's all gone.
Out the window.
It's all gone. And and it's great. We love greatness, right? And, you know, Steve, we'll get to football in a second, but we all love greatness. We all love witnessing greatness. And you see athletes that have to overcome some of that stuff where you know they're good, but how good can they be? And when you actually see somebody take that next step and become a legend, it's pretty special.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. And, you know, following golf, like, it's such a mental game, and now playing it, like, you understand just how challenging it can be. And to have that hurdle overcome last year was such a special moment. And it's been really cool to kind of watch him just kind of, you know, you can see the weight lifted off his shoulders, and at a place like, you know, Augusta National, and you know, a course that just stays true to what it is you know, for him to now conquer that and to just kind of be the Rory that we all thought he could be, it's been really cool to watch that.
Yeah, man, it's special, man. I can't wait for Sunday. I was saying earlier that it's going to come down to the wire, but the way that this guy's playing right now, he's determined and his focus. And we were talking to BT earlier about pressure of everybody from newcomers to returning guys, and Roy's just taking that in stride and really making that happen.
Yeah, he really has. You know, he's putting pressure now on everybody else.
Right.
To come get him. And I think that is such a big deal for him. You know, there were guys coming into this that were playing really good golf. I thought Justin Rose was going to be, you know, more in contention. I thought he was playing great golf, and thought Scotty Scheffler would have it figured out by now. But, you know, he is just playing at a level. Rory, you know, is playing at a level that puts the pressure on everybody else now. So should be fun the next 2 days.
Look at Steve Bartle doing golf talk, but right now there's Utah fans are yelling at the radio right now, Steve.
Yes,
they're saying,
yes.
We wanted to talk about the Utes. Would you guys stop talking about golf? So let's talk about the Utes. Spring football rolls on. You know, it's interesting. You know, it's been great. Let me ask you this. Morgan Scally. We knew he was the right guy for the job. We knew it was an opportunity that he had earned. But I think it's so hard to replace the guy. You know what I mean? And everyone's been watching him in every detail of how he does things and how he's doing media availability. That's kind of a big microscope on a guy and some pressure. Feels to me like Morgan has handled it flawlessly.
Honestly, JJ, I don't know how much better he could handle it if not flawlessly, right? You know, he's taken everything, you know, in stride. He's given credit where it's due with Kyle Whittingham, and rightfully so. and the appreciation of what Kyle meant to Morgan is not lost on him. He knows what Kyle has done for his career, and Morgan has come into this, opportunity and into this role, and hasn't tried to reinvent the wheel. He knows what Utah football is built upon and what works here. He's spent so much time in that program building it up to what it is that it doesn't need a complete overhaul. It doesn't need a complete makeover. You can stick with what has worked for so long while tweaking things here and there, adding a little bit of an evolution of sorts, in some facets, has also been something that I think a lot of people have picked up on in terms of, what he's talked about with the offense, right? He's maintained that it still starts in the trenches. Everything starts in the trenches. You've got to be physical. You've got to win the line of scrimmage. But I think Morgan has also gained an appreciation for that quarterback position. And with what we've seen in the hires of Kevin McGivern and Ryan Gunderson, I think it speaks to the importance that Morgan puts on that position. And then just spring ball in general, he's done a lot to open up practice access to the media, where we have a better sense of what's going on than we did before, under Kyle Whittingham. And that's been really interesting. And, Morgan, invited the media up for, an opportunity to watch film with him, to ask him questions. And, I think he's been really open. He's been, as transparent as you can be as a head coach in college football. And it's just been really kind of refreshing in a lot of ways to go up to practice now and to get to hear from Morgan Scalley, to see what he has to say and just how he's continuing to make this program his.
Yeah, let's stay on Morgan for a little bit here, and I'm interested in to your interviews. I've been up to practice, I've been around the facility and talk, but from your conversations with guys, what is his reception from the players, right? We understand how important that is, the coach to players, and especially in a transition period as Utah is in right now. But what has the reception from all the guys been, and how they are engaging with Morgan and taking in this spring with stride?
Yeah, the players have been really vocal about the culture that Morgan Scalley has, developed on that defensive side of the ball, and the offense has embraced it. That RSNB acronym that he's, coined over the last little while has largely been the ID of the defense, but the offense has taken to it, and they understand what it means. And I think players have talked a lot about Morgan and just how he's interacted with them, kind of the engagement that they have on and off the field. A handful of players have talked about, feeling a sense of investment that may have not been there, just little things, right? This isn't major overhauls, but just little things like stopping and having a conversation with guys in the hallway and asking them about what's going on in their life. Little things like that add up over time. And I think that's been something that, for the players has created a real strong sense of family and culture where, you have your head coach now genuinely investing in it. And it's created a lot of buy-in so far through spring ball.
Nice. You're looking at positionally, and I think that's, you can only learn so much in spring, but I found it interesting because going into the season, Steve, I felt like, man, offensive line is going to be a big challenge. You're losing 5 starters. You've got a new offensive line coach. That seemed to be a real spot where you're looking at maybe what do they have? How are they going to work things out there? But everything I'm hearing from Morgan and everybody in camp is the offensive line is amazing, and their offensive line is going to be great. Can you help Utah fans understand why there's so much optimism about the offensive line when there's a lack of experience there and a lack of starters returning and a new offensive line coach?
Yeah, I think, Morgan has talked a lot about the group developing at a rate that's, I think, ahead of schedule, more so than proclaiming it's going to be a great offensive line, or it's going to live up to what Utah had last year. Because when you lose 2 first-round offensive tackles, you lose 3 interior linemen that have over 6,000 snaps combined between the 3 of them, and a group that played 2 seasons together, that's nearly impossible to replace, regardless of who you've had in the room, who you have coaching the room. When you lose 5 players like that, you're going to see a step back. But what Utah has in that room is they have players that have developed behind that group of 5 that has moved on from the program. They've got guys that have been in the program now multiple years that have developed over time. And so they've come into this where they've spent a lot of time developing under Jim Harding, and Jordan Gross has come into the room, and he's been so involved and around the program over the last couple of years, coming down from Idaho to visit the program, that these guys are really familiar with Coach Gross. He was able to really kind of hit the ground running with this group in terms of the relationship within the room. And I think that's been something that's been really key in Gross getting this offensive line to perform the way that it has during spring ball. So there is still a lot of work to do with the offensive line. There is, a noticeable difference from how the group was executing last year and the dominance that they played with to what we're seeing in practice now. But I think in terms of the expectation level and what they had planned for this group, I think Morgan has talked a lot about this group being ahead of schedule, that they are seeing good signs. They are seeing good development from the group. And I think that, above all else, is really, really encouraging. It's going to be a step back this year from last year. But this group, there are encouraging signs that we've seen over the course of spring ball.
Make game day yours. Tickets, food and drinks, stats, and streaming. Everything you need is in the Utah Mammoth app. Download today and make game night easy. Download on both Android and iPhone. Just top.
Yeah, man, I've been up there, and I've been very encouraged by what Jordan Gross is doing with those guys. One, on the interior of that offensive line with Salatal Moyai, he is great. He's solid. He's so big and sturdy, but he's so athletic. He has great feet. And for that guard position, have great feet. He's a guy that I want pulling. Pull that guard with him all the time. And Keith Olsen's another guy that's been in the program for a while and very confident, and he can get in there. And Alex Harrison, I really like him from his mindset. He's very, very smart, and that's what you need at that center position. You need a very intelligent guy, and it's hard. We're going to replace 2 All-Americans on the outside, so you can't really put a comparison there. But I think this offensive line is going to be pretty good, heading into fall. I don't really take much from spring, but they got the great potential, man, and so it's good. I'm interested to see or hear, who has been, what the coaches have been saying about their surprises and the biggest leaders from spring, because you go through the roster and you see, man, we got some dudes, man, from, we didn't get to end the season with Hunter Andrews, but, he's out there healthy and out there doing stuff. Creed Whittemore had a great end to the season last year. You got new guys and Brandon Pagans and Kyrie Scholes that's came in here. Who are some of the standouts? Jackson Binney had a terrific year last year. This is going to be another breakout year for him. Who's been the standouts on the team offensively and defensively so far in spring?
Yeah, I think what's been really interesting, and we'll start with that wide receiver room, is, they brought in 2 transfers in Braden Pagan from Utah State and Kyrie Scholes from San Jose State. And, they've been 2 guys that have lived up to expectations. They were brought in to be, go-to type of receivers, and at the very least, reliable options for Dev and for Bird to throw to. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen within that wide receiver room is the surprise development of Nate Johnson. That's been the hot topic over the last couple of weeks.
Wow.
Is his transformation from this Swiss Army knife gadget type of player where, you have to kind of designate, these looks for him. He's become a genuine receiver where he's now out there running quality routes, making highlight reel worthy catches, and has just caught everybody by surprise with the types of plays that he's making and the consistency at which he's doing it. So he's worked hard to make this transition to wide receiver full time. And I think Coach Bumpus has done a really good job with embracing this opportunity with Nate and helping bring him along and kind of developing this wide receiver mindset. So Nate, I think, in my opinion, has been the biggest surprise of spring ball for Utah. And for that to develop there in that room with what else they have around him, there's still Larry Simmons, who through the first 2 weeks of camp was the buzzword in that wide receiver room. So there's been a lot of depth, and overall I think the wide receiver room in general has become, I think, the surprise position. And I say that because there were expectations of this group to be better, but even then I think this group has surprised at how much better it has gotten. So we'll start there. And then on defense, I've been impressed with what we've seen in that defensive tackle room. Utah had to replace 3 guys that were in the rotation last year, and last season was a difficult year for that defensive tackle room. There were injuries that led to guys being in and out of the lineup. Utah's, had to rely on Jonah Lea'ea, who was, at best 285, 290 pounds if he ate a couple burritos before stepping on the scale. and they've have these 2 freshmen from last season, Carson Kafusi and Pupu Sepulona, that they needed to step up and become the leaders of that room. And I think from what I've seen and from what I've gathered, and as we've talked to Coach Scowling, we've talked to some of the players, that those who have really kind of stepped forward in that room and become the leaders. And they've also brought in 3 other defensive tackle transfers that have provided, nice elements and really kind of rounded out the depth of that defensive tackle room, which is going to be a position that Utah needs better play from going into this season. So I've been really encouraged by what I've seen in that defensive tackle room, and Carson Kafusi specifically, not only as a player but as a leader. And I think that's going to be really beneficial for him, not only this season but for over the course of his career.
Before we catch you loose, I wanted to sneak in a Utah basketball question. This offseason is curious and interesting, and there's been a lot of guys in the transfer portal, and I think that's probably for the best because this program has a lot of things they need to do to get better, and it starts with the roster. What does Alex Jensen need to do this offseason? What does that staff and that program need to do this offseason to take another step? Because let's be honest, that first season was pretty rough.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it's important to understand that, the timing of Alex hires last year and his staff, right, being hired in March, being provided with only a couple weeks to prepare for the transfer portal, coming from the NBA, they were starting from ground zero in terms of their roster construction last year. That's the biggest difference that's the biggest difference for Alex Jensen this season compared to last year, is that it's not necessarily what they need to do, but it's what they've done up to this point that will have them ready to go and be better equipped to go into this transfer portal cycle and recruit to their vision and what they're actually trying to build under Alex Jensen. They've been able to actually, put together their boards of players that, they're going to have their evaluations done. They're going to have the relationships in place to go into this cycle and recruit with intent. And I think that's going to be the biggest difference this year compared to last year. And so, Alex is going to need to go into this cycle and obviously with the roster turnover that's expected, and I've written about this at KSL Sports, at this point, the only for sure player coming back next season is Lucas Longarita, who was a mid-year addition, somebody that they brought over from Spain. And, he's going to be, counted upon to kind of take a step forward as a playmaker offensively. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And for Alex, I think the most important position that he needs to address is that point guard position. And, losing Terrence Brown to the transfer portal, he was a dynamic scorer, a real just a great attacking presence from that point guard spot. But I think Utah is going to focus more on a true floor general this cycle and looking for somebody that is better equipped and has the game suited to incorporate others and be more of that floor general type. So I look at point guard as a really important position for Alex to get somebody in here that can operate in that manner. And then from there, they do have an incoming 2026 class that's got some JUCO. They've got an international guy in there. They've got some returning missionaries, including Jackson Johnson, who was a 4-star talent a couple of years ago. Those are going to be guys that will be in the mix next season, but they're going to need a number of players that are starter caliber type guys in the Big 12, and then they're going to need to then fill out the rest of the bench. So there is a lot of work to be done, and a lot of people are going to be wondering, what is Utah's budget going to be looking like? And a lot of people around the program want Alex to succeed, and in the Big 12, we know that there is a lot of money invested into these basketball programs, and Alex is going to have the support in order to put together a much more competitive roster to be competitive in the Big 12 next season. So, this isn't going to be a complete transformation where suddenly Utah is, battling and pushing for, NCAA tournament success, getting to the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. That's not necessarily the expectation, but getting a competitive roster and trying to get back and working to get back to the NCAA tournament, because this is a long-term process. And I think that's the goal for Alex and Wes, is putting together a roster that makes them competitive and keeps them in the conversation of the NCAA tournament. And hopefully, at this time next year, we're talking about what they accomplished in the NCAA tournament.
You can read the latest on Utah basketball and Utah spring football on KSLSports.com from Steve Bartle. And, of course, follow him on all social media channels, outlets, whatever you want to call it. Steve is very active there as well. And the everything you do. I mean, free plug. What's the latest people can – you got everything going on.
Blockcast, all that.
Yeah. Blockcast. What's the latest Blockcast?
Yeah, dropped the Utah Blockcast episode today. Had an interview with wide receiver Ricky Johnson, recapping what we saw from practice yesterday. 2 other episodes. It just, the work never stops, fellas. You guys know that.
Even in April.
Even in April.
Especially in
Nobody covers the Utes better than Steve Bartle. Steve, thanks for joining us. Enjoy Masters Weekend. Should be fun.
You guys have a great weekend as well. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Steve.
Make game day yours. Tickets, food and drinks, stats, and streaming. Everything you need is in the Utah Mammoth app. Download today and make game night easy. Download on both Android and iPhone. Tusk Top.